This statement that we just got, Sheila, goes on to say that this accounts for the rigorous scrutiny that regulatory authorities are rightly applying at every step. But haven't they been applying the regulatory scrutiny? Like, what was the anticipation from the analysts about when this plane was going to be free and clear to return to the skies?
So our estimates had forecasted a return to service in April and a production restart in October, which I think is probably what drove the stock down today, in addition to CNBC reporting, of course, is that this aircraft might not get recertified and back in the air until mid-2020, because that also has implications for the rest of the supply chain. So that's a lot later than folks anticipated.
Why would the delay of the ungrounding affect the production going back into circulation in October?
So that's a good question. One thing to be mindful of is there's 400 aircraft currently in inventory, because remember, the supply chain was still producing at 42 a month, even though the aircraft was grounded in March. So for 9 months, the supply chain manufactured this aircraft. And I think the focus item here is going to be to get those aircraft that are currently sitting on the ground off to customers sooner rather than restart production. So a mid-2020 return to service means you get more of a delay on the production restart as well.
One more question, Sheila. How do we know what kind of backlog Boeing has for the 737s? And more importantly, for those that had placed the orders prior to the issue, do they have a right to cancel that order or modify their order?
So the backlog right now currently stands at 4,900 orders or thereabouts. What's interesting, with the exception of Fly Dubai that had a modest change, you haven't really seen any customers change their orders. And that's because Airbus is sold out on its competing aircraft, the A320, until 2024. So customers haven't had much leeway, even though the down payment, if you're expecting an aircraft in 2022 might have been minimal, you still didn't change that order because you have nowhere else to go at the moment.
Sheila, we reported on the settlements that were made with Southwest and American Airlines regarding the 2019 charges. I would think this is going to add significantly to the charges that the airlines are going back to Boeing with.
So I think it'll depend for every airline what their concession package looks like. But what we backed into with Southwest and American is about $10 million per aircraft, and the list price is around maybe $100 million. So the concessions that Boeing has reported, the charges it took in July, where it was a pre-tax charge of $5.6 billion, assuming about a 6-month delay. So you could at least double that charge from here.
Do you know whether there's insurance coverage for any of this?
So there is coverage, but I think, the coverage on the concessions, that's why Boeing is taking those charges, is because there'll be some form of repayment back, whether that's on the aircraft or whether that's on a service agreement. It'll vary depending on the customer.
Ask that question about the leases.
Well, I think my other question really is, are they writing checks back to these companies, or are they just discounting future orders? Because I want to know how the cash is actually flowing. Are you literally writing me a check back because I lost revenue? Or if I have one of the 4,900 orders out there, are you discounting that amount?
So it'll depend. It varies by customer. If you're Southwest and you're a big customer, I'm sure you have a more favorable settlement than others that might have an aircraft in 2022 and it's not impacting your capacity or current airline schedules at all. So again, I think the biggest customers have obviously been the most impacted. Southwest has 280 of these on order, so clearly they'll see a different form of
payback. That's fascinating, because the last thing companies want to do is write checks usually to somebody else, so they could discount or barter against the upcoming order. Final question is the one that Marcus asked in our last segment. We didn't really know the answer. Are the airlines on the hook to the leasing companies that sometimes own those planes for the lease payments, even though the planes aren't flying? And then do the airlines come back to Boeing and make that part of their settlement deal with Boeing?
So, when you look at an airline, they're the official customer of the aircraft, and the lease lessor is the customer. The airline is the operator. So the lessor will be the recipient of those concessions, and they could sort it out with their own customer base.
So the lessor would go.
That's why we've seen some outspoken comments from some of the lessors recently about name changes, because they are, in fact, the customer.
The lessor would come back to Boeing and say,
yes,
here.
But what rights do they have to do that?
Because they are, in fact, the customer who's putting down the down payment.
But the ones that are already in circulation, I'm sorry to continue this, but the ones that are already in circulation, and if I'm United Airlines and I have 14 or 15 in a hangar and I can't fly them, but I still have a payment that's due every Friday or every Monday, whatever it may be, who's making that payment? And if I'm making that payment, who's giving me my money back?
So, I think of the 370-odd aircraft that are currently grounded at the moment, I don't want, as Boeing has not emphasized what the concessions exactly look like. I'm sure if they have a cash obligation, Boeing is refunding them for it. The ones that are in 2022 and beyond, I'm sure they have a different, sort of pricing agreement with Boeing.